Greetings and salutations, ladies and menfolk. Welcome to another episode of Game Break, a full coverage writer's endeavor, where me and my crew take a break from our various creative endeavors and play some video games to decompress and de-stress and all that good stuff. I am Charles, coming to you today with World and Economica, the next visual novel that I'll be doing for I don't know how many episodes, however many it takes. Now, this was produced by Spicy Tales and was another Kickstarter-based visual novel. What really intrigued me by this one was it's created by the same person who does Spice and Wolf, which is one of my favorite manga, and light novels and anime. Basically, any format that it's in, I seem to enjoy. So I was curious about this one. Now, we are going to be doing the English version because my Japanese is absolute rubbish, so let's not even bother trying to figure that one out. And jump right in. Jump right in as I cough. In the past, people really believed that there was a doorway to an alternate world on the dark side of the moon. This dark side could not be seen from Earth, and it was only a few decades ago that images were successfully taken of it. As Earth had been visited, mapped, and divested of all its mysteries and secrets, it was made painfully clear that there were no rabbits on the moon, no traces of aliens, and certainly no pieces of portals to alternate worlds. This was perhaps why the journey to the dark side of the moon through the vastness of space was so fascinating for me when my parents took me there as a kid. Mankind had never set foot upon any of the glittering stars that were arrayed before me. When I realized that, I felt a desire to leave my footprints where no one had gone before. Star Trek. It wasn't until after I learned more about the world that it dawned on me what a foolhardy dream that was. Regardless, it was something that shook me to the core so much that I nearly wet my pants. Afterwards, everything before me became a stepping stone in my mind, towards my dream of setting foot where no one had gone before. I had no time to waste. If I didn't act now, then someone else would leave their footprints there first. Faster, faster, much faster. The population continued to grow and time ruthlessly slipped away. Only a handful could be the vanguard of it all. Not a day went by where I didn't ponder what I could see. It would be a new frontier where familiar places, customs, and the past would not exist. A frontier where every small movement I made would become part of history. The footprints of the first humans on the moon could still be found, preserved in the Sea of Tranquility Memorial Hall. Those footprints told uncountable tales. Footprints left in the sand, measuring just shy of 30 inches. Even so, they were amazing footprints that sent shivers down my spine. And white screen. The end! Black screen. The beginning? With a click, my mobile PC turned on. I awoke to the whirring of the hard drive. Since I had fallen asleep curled up in my chair clutching my PC, it was difficult to get my body to move. My body felt so stiff, I was sure that a careless motion would break something. Even so, I rather enjoyed the sensation of slowly stretching out my limbs from this cramped position after waking up. It made me feel alive and truly let me know that I was awake. I willed my arms to move, then my legs. Although hardly efficient, this was how I chose to do things, and was what happened when I woke up every morning. It was a satisfying action, and one I never had a chance to savor before I left home. On top of the table, I had left my rather crude diode lamp on, and a coarse layer of fat had formed on the surface of the leftover coffee in my dirty cup. Wait, hold on. Why is there fat in your coffee? What do you consider coffee, or what are you putting in your coffee that's a thing? That's not healthy or sanitary. Beside my cup was a half-eaten chocolate bar, which I reached for and crammed into my mouth. I swallowed the unpleasantly sweet chunk as the PC finished booting up. At that moment, my brain went to work as I verified that I had my wallet, memory cards, and bag on me, and that none of it had been stolen while I was asleep. Where are we falling asleep that's an issue? It appeared that I had survived the previous night. Why is that a concern? Only then did I breathe a sigh of relief. However, in order for me to survive today, I would have to make some money. It had been 3 months and 12 days since I left home. Telling myself that I wasn't just some well-to-do kid pretending to be a ruffian, I flipped open the organic display. Okay, that is a very energetic beat for having just woken up. Goodness. I was staying in a cheap net cafe that had really loud jazz music going on. It was a good-for-nothing establishment that leached Wi-Fi from another shop, and its customers were of equally questionable quality. And you're there, too. Whoa! Okay. Hello. Oi, kid! Fine morning, isn't it? As I left the booth to go wash my face, an unkempt clerk greeted me as he played a game at the counter. I figured he wasn't so much being friendly as much as he was making sure I knew he was watching me. The only entrance and exit were next to the counter, and off to the side on the wall were the words, "Everyone pays, no freeloaders." Even though this sad excuse for a building was built in a sewage canal, money was always collected. The only thing that concerned me when I left home was finding a place to sleep. Though I had some money, I couldn't really change my appearance. Fine morning. I'm not fond of your sarcasm, Earth Dog. The clerk's face twisted into a smile at my retort. Oh, it is unfortunate to not know what a real morning looks like, since the weather here is just a computer program. He said that lightly as he returned his gaze to his game. He seemed to be from Earth, though I wondered if he came to the moon as unskilled labor, got fired, and ended up here as an outcast of some sort. Why don't you head on back to Earth then? At my words, he turned briefly to glance at me and laughed sarcastically. Things are better here than down there anyhow. That's how he responded. Yeah, I just read that. I know. Moon scum. Without responding, I went to the washroom. My name's Yoshiharu Kawara. Kawara. However I pronounce my last name. I was born and raised in this lunar city, so I was genuine moon scum. I returned to my booth, entered my password, and booted up the tool application on my computer. A welcome screen, whose only good point was its friendliness, was followed by a merciless and desolate landscape, much akin to the surface of the moon. Countless lines of words flickered on the screen. I imagine it's the kind of effect you'd get if you took a picture of the undeveloped part of the moon's surface with a low-res camera. The screen showed a session of the Lunar Stock Exchange. This was the kind of place for moon scum like me to make a living. I'll get rich without needing to break a sweat. I didn't have enough time to earn an honest living. I took a deep breath and went about business. Hey, that's what I look like. Downward revision for the first fiscal quarter of CK Bio. Possibility of an investigation into Emerald Industries over suspicions of collusion. Regarding inflation, the board of directors at the Lunar Central Park. Oh, this is this going to be just like my day job where I'm reading articles for stuff? I didn't sign up for this. Can we not have like a 10 episode series where I'm just reading reports? That would be unfortunate. With one eye on the stream of news, I focused on managing 220 stocks, picking up those with large price fluctuations. Keeping track of 220 stocks, that's admittedly pretty impressive. For instance, if one stock had moved 10% on the previous day, and another had moved 1%, there was probably a high chance that the stock that moved 10% could move by 1% today. That's a Kraft Lawrence-style monologue right there, trying to explain things to Holo. I would trade it on that notion alone. Putting into consideration the mood of the market based on the news, I would buy stocks with large fluctuations. Within the turbulent up and down movement of the price, I could extract some profit, which is what I occupied myself with between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. lunar time. Between those hours, the only thing that went into my mouth were food that I could eat one-handed and drinks. To be honest, I'd be so engrossed in trading that breaks were uncommon. Even if I had the free time to take a break, I'd rather use it to look at my screen to grasp price fluctuations and do some trades. So he's a pretty serious dude. He's working 9 to 5 to make money on the Lunar Stock Exchange. That's how you want to make your living. After all, a difference of a few minutes when making the call to buy or sell could easily mean the difference between gaining or losing 1 or 2%. My war chest was 72,000 mools. Mools? Why not just say quatlus? 1% of that came out to 700 mools. A store clerk here would make 7 mools an hour at best. This was a place where a public school teacher's monthly starting salary was 1,200 mools, so I could make in a few minutes what they'd make in a month. Of course, over the course of a day's trading, some people would win and others would lose, but I was on the winning streak of all streaks, and before I knew it, my seed money of 1,000 mools had ballooned to 72 times. Well, aren't we impressive? Well, 72 times that. That's an unfortunate line break. The one and only time I did honest, hard labor in my life was to build that seed money. Since then, I'd just been building my assets through these trades. While the gains were a little less than what they used to be, the greater your assets grew, the faster they grew, so it didn't worry me. It'd be what they'd call a snowball effect. I'd never seen snow before, but I'd seen videos on Earth before, and thus I was familiar with it. I had decided that I was going to make even more money and then live in the center of this lunar city. It's a place where tons of ridiculously smart people were gathered. It's said that 70% of this world's wealth was held by the people there. I'd live it up there, and then... The back of my head was high on these kinds of delusions as I performed trade after trade like a man possessed. That's why it took me a while to notice. I finally did after I got smacked on the head. Oi! What do you want? Yo, kid! I turned around to see that clerk from before standing in front of the booth's open door. What? You want money? Since when did this place become prepay? Or what? Was it something else? Was making money not allowed here? What do you want? I'm busy. As I glared at him, the overly skinny, bleary-eyed clerk let out a tired sigh. That's your reply? I came to tell you that the police are on the way to gather up street urchins and... Before the clerk finished his sentence, my PC had been closed and thrown into my bag. Hey, wait! The employee grabbed my shoulder as I tried to push him aside and exit the booth. Though he was thin, he was still muscular, strong enough to remind you that he was an adult. Still, I always kept a set amount of money in my breast pocket for times like this. I grabbed it and thrust it into his hands. Keep the change. I put on my hat, shouldered my bag, and ran down a narrow corridor. Wondering what was going on in the booth, a bunch of guys who looked like they'd just mumble useless replies to any police questioning peeked through the cracks from their booths, wondering if someone had been arrested. Not yet. This is running music. Nice. After sliding past the dirty counter, I made it to the store's even filthier exit. The chipped away paint and rust made the already cramped building feel even more claustrophobic. I ran straight down the hallway towards the open air. There were stairs if I turned left at the end of the hall, but I had never had any plans to use them in the first place. Without a moment's hesitation, I kicked off the floor, jumping as high as I could. Passing over the concrete wall, my body flew out over the street. Because the cafe was on the 5th floor of the building, there was a heck of a view below me. I hope there's moon gravity. I jumped towards the wall of the building opposite me and then kicked off from that wall, aiming back towards the wall of the first building. Moon parkour! Once the sole of my foot hit a pipe on the wall, I jumped straight up with all my strength and resolve. Human genes had been fine-tuned for living on Earth over millions of years, so with some weight training, anyone could perform feats like these on the moon, where the gravity was lower. What you couldn't do was allow yourself to miss your daily training. Jumping from wall to wall, I quickly reached the 14th floor of the building next door. I guess my heart rate did go up a bit. I glanced down to see a pair of blue-uniformed policemen looking bored as they tapped their batons on their shoulders and climbed the stairs. It seemed that clerk wasn't playing a prank on me when he gave me that tip. I already paid my thanks to him when I handed him that money, though. By now, he should probably have already used the change from it to kick back with a store-bought beer. For a moment, I opened up my bag in the hallway and flipped open my PC screen. I ran off in the middle of a trade, and so my position hadn't changed. I should be able to get at least a weak wireless connection out here. If I were lucky, prices would have risen and I'd be home free. But usually, at times like this... figures. After hanging my head in disappointment, I closed out my losing positions and called it a day. Even though I haven't really seen Cowboy Bebop, for some reason this type of music brings it to mind. Maybe Space Dandy as well. Probably also some Gurren Lagann. Nice. Nothing good could come from wandering around downtown in the middle of the day. After jumping from one building to the next, I decided to walk down a deserted hallway towards my favorite Chinese restaurant. It was the time of day when most people my age would be at school, so walking around carelessly would get you chased down by the cops before you knew it. Until you turned 18, the legal age here, it was mandatory that you belong to some sort of educational institution. I presume we are not. Some people would say that this was a good thing, while others grumbled something about government-funded programs. I fell into neither camp. My way of dealing with systems I didn't like was to quietly escape them, not to loudly criticize them. On that note, this area, with all of its complicated passages and extreme elevation changes, it's not odd to see the 7th floor of one building to be next to the basement of another, was convenient for people like me. Not to mention the overgrown vegetation here and there that acted as good cover. These plants weren't originally included in the city plans, but had leaked out of one of the many lunar laboratories where they were messing with their genes. Genetic manipulation never seems to end well. Supposedly, genes had tons of factors that expressed themselves differently depending on the environment, so a lot of plants and animals started acting strangely as soon as they were brought to the moon. There were even people saying that life forms on Earth could have originated from outer space and brought to Earth via the moon. Some of these plants grew so well on the moon's inorganic matter that you might wonder if they'd been around here for 1,000,000 years. Of course, it wasn't as if these plants were free from the laws of physics. Nitrogen and other nutrients for them were often brought over from Earth. So I hadn't heard about any worries that the surface of the moon would be taken over by the greenery. This applied to more than just plants. As for the humans here, it didn't matter how many ultra-elite think tanks came to energize the lunar economy and its industries. Life here just wasn't sustainable without sending a lot of things over from Earth. According to the government's statements, even if the orbital elevator were to stop moving today, there was currently enough biomass here to create an enclosed, recycling-based environment. In other words, we'd be able to eat food, crap it out, then use that crap to grow more food to eat, and so on. They'd be able to make a ton of electricity with solar panels while collecting direct sunlight to use as a super hot source of heat. So, maybe they're right. I mean, people even say that Earth was in more danger environmentally, since they're still relying on oil and nuclear power. I didn't know who was right. Whatever the case, I had dreams, and if it meant making my dreams come true, I didn't care if I was on Earth or on the moon. After all, my dream was to stand at the forefront of humanity. It'd be a place where you could only look forward and live by advancing onward. Who cared about what happened to the world behind you? And if I couldn't make this dream come true, then there'd be no reason for me to live. Well, that's a little melodramatic. This was why, to put it logically, I'd never worried a single bit about the moon's environment or whatever. What I worried about was how much money I made and how fast I reached my goals. While I was thinking about these things, I passed through the thickly vegetated tunnel towards high ground. Ooh. It was a clear day, as it always was. On the other side of a translucent membrane, the visible half of the mist-covered Earth looked small. The sky over the lunar city was wrapped in a see-through dome, and right beyond it was outer space. Gravity was weak on the moon, so you couldn't naturally keep large amounts of gases stored up on the surface. Also, while apparently each 24-hour day on Earth had a morning, afternoon, and night, which was followed the next day by another morning, the moon alternated between 2 weak days and 2 weak nights. Good lord. However, the human body cycle was set differently, thanks to tens of thousands of years of living on Earth. Because most of the people living on the moon were immigrants from Earth, its dome was adjusted to give off light in an Earth-like way. It even had sprinklers attached to it so that it would rain. That's pretty cool. However, I'd only seen things like downpours and thunderstorms in videos. When it rained here, it was always just a drizzle. Strong winds never blew here. The only winds felt here were the slow, coiling movements of the atmosphere due to centrifugal and Coriolis forces, as well as the gentle breeze of the air inside the dome being mechanically circulated. I strayed from the street onto a grass-covered cliff and jumped upwards with a grunt. I kicked off a tree branch and rotated my body to land on the top of the tunnel. This was a box seat where you can look down on the greater part of the city. It's a nice view. I grabbed some beef jerky out of my bag and bit into it. According to the guys who came from Earth, this wasn't at all close to the real thing, but it's the only beef jerky I knew. There was a number of cities on the moon. The one I lived in was the very first city to be created, and I could get a clear view of the whole thing from here. The spot in front of me where pointed skyscrapers sprung upward one after the other was called Newton City. It wasn't like entry here was regulated. However, it had the feel of a special zone where only certain people could enter, since it was full of giant corporate buildings. Even public spaces like shopping malls and parks were overrun with police and city regulations. Most wealth here was created in Newton City, and you could find famous tycoons with assets worth over 10 billion mools all over the place. And we only have like 27,000. Good lord, we have a long ways to go. If you had that much wealth, you'd undoubtedly be able to be on the forefront when humanity took its next step. Money could make just about any desire you might have in this world come true. In this world, money ruled all. Like a photograph of the moment a drop of liquid hit a pool of water, a group of skyscrapers stood in the dead center of Newton City, while the buildings around that area were suddenly much shorter. That area was where middle-class people who worked in Newton City lived in was called Green City, or the White Belt. It was a place full of people who loved words like high society and refinement. The kind of people who claimed to care about grace and harmony, but were really full of nothing but pride and obsessions with upward mobility. Whenever I went there, I felt sick seeing the sterilized rows of small, nicely manicured lawns and white-walled buildings. There wasn't a single piece of garbage on the streets, and the only plants around were domesticated trees on the roadside. After that, the buildings in the area around Green City got taller again, but it was a complete jumble. There, power lines dangled messily onto the streets and vulgar neon signs lit the area, painting the whole place with a feel of squalor. The area was called at the outer sections, and while technically they'd all been numbered from 1 to 8, there was no real point. If you considered Newton City the center of everything, the north was full of factories. There you could find silicon dioxide dissolution factories, fertilizer synthesis factories, automated plantations, and so on. On the east side was the village where I lived. That area was notorious for its hard-nosed residents. You could also find settlements of old-timers, whom you might call artisans in the area, which made for a countless number of small workshops. Most people didn't have the luxury of being able to do something like transport wooden furniture via orbital elevator, and land was expensive on the moon, so the houses of Green City were small. As a result, handmade furniture created with the size and shape of your house in mind was far more popular than ready-made furniture. I was told that my parents were aiming to live together with plants brought from Earth in exchange for making furniture out of wood. Even though factories existed that used the best scientific advances to maximize harvest rates as much as physically possible, they still grew plants by hand for some reason. They seemed to at least have their customers, but I didn't see a single enjoyable thing about being covered in dirt. It just made me wonder why they even came to the moon in the first place. This wasn't the place for stuff like that. The moon was supposed to be a place where you directed your gaze to the top of the inorganic buildings that line Newton City. And if I shifted my eyes to the left, I saw an area haunted by those who couldn't keep up in that struggle. Here, when buildings started rusting, no one would bother to repaint them. It had been nicknamed the Red Valley. The reason it was called a valley was because when Newton City was originally built on a flat crater floor, all the low-income workers made the Rocky Mountains surrounding the city their home. And by Rocky Mountains, I don't quite mean something like the harsh mountainous environments you might find on Earth. It was actually closer to what you might call highlands. As a result, the rock was chipped away to increase surface area, like a river eroding hills, and many structures could be built in a tight area by terracing the slopes. Furthermore, more space was secured by digging caves into the rocky stretches. It was clearly evident that doing this over and over made for a mess of a city. Not much more than a decade had passed since the city's establishment, and it had already become such a devilish haunt that you wouldn't blame the local government if they just threw up their hands and gave up. As for me, I liked the Red Valley with its level of squalor. While it was true that the people living there could be called outcasts and failures, the place was irresponsible in a good way, and that put me at ease. Of course, I had no intentions of becoming the 20% that lived here. And finally, the area around where I was right now was called the 6th Outer Section. It was not as degenerate as the Red Valley, but it was not quite as productive as the east side of town. This area didn't even have a nickname yet, and its lackadaisical aspects oozed out at every turn. While the buildings were dirty and worn out, it was dotted with small companies who dreamed of Newton City, and the occasional decent-looking house. So it wasn't the worst place to live. I stood up, hopped back down to the street, and jogged off. Are we finally going to Chinese food? The road was paved with neatly shaved limestone rocks. It was chipped and cracked here and there, but no one ever tried to patch it. The rough dirt of the moon had piled in its recesses. Waterways were occasionally visible, and in them you could see clear running water, as well as fish swimming. While hydrogen was available on the moon, there was no water, So once hydrogen had been synthesized into water, it was made sure that every drop remained circulating within the dome. The waterway's final destination was the giant water processing plant under Newton City. In other words, everything was designed to gather in the center of the mortar-shaped city, whether it's people, water, or wealth. From there, everything was disseminated outward. After crossing the intricate waterways and bridges, I passed through a narrow alley and reached my destination. It was called the Lunar Chinese Restaurant. I guess you know what you're going to be getting if you go to a place called Lunar Chinese Restaurant while in a lunar city. It's run by a Chinese husband and wife with a strong spirit of enterprise who emigrated to the moon. I could sit down here from early afternoon to whenever, and they wouldn't say a word. However, the elderly wife's health had been fading recently, and the woman who sometimes worked at the restaurant in their place was a bit of a pain. While I prayed that she wouldn't be there today, it was in vain, especially on an unlucky day already full of policemen and stock losses. And as we enter the Chinese place and the music kicks in, I think we're going to call it there, simply so that I can make sure that this actually saves the recording, as this is my 5th freaking try to make the stupid recording stick. So with that, thank you for joining me for episode 1 of World End Economica. So I guess our main character is Haru, trying to make his way in on the moon. I was going to say in the world, but no, just on the moon. So we'll see just how he's going to go about doing that in episode 2, presumably with some Chinese food involved. But in the meantime, get back to being creative already. After I learned more about the world, that it dawned on me what a foolhardy dream that was. Regardless, it was something that shook me to the core so much that I nearly wet my pants. Afterwards, everything before me became a stepping stone in my mind, towards my dream of setting foot where no one had gone before. I had no time to waste. If I didn't act now, then someone else would leave their footprints there first. Faster, faster, much faster. The population continued to grow and time ruthlessly slipped away. Only a handful could be the vanguard of it all. Not a day went by where I didn't ponder what I could see. It would be a new frontier where familiar places, customs, and the past would not exist. A frontier where every small movement I made would become part of history. The footprints of the first humans on the moon could still be found, preserved in the Sea of Tranquility Memorial Hall. Those footprints told uncountable tales. Footprints left in the sand, measuring just shy of 30 inches. Even so, they were amazing. Greetings and salutations, ladies and menfolk. Welcome to another episode of Game Break, a full coverage writer's endeavor, where me and my crew take a break from our various creative endeavors and play some video games to decompress and de-stress and all that good stuff. I am Charles, coming to you today with World End Economica, the next visual novel that I'll be doing for I don't know how many episodes, however many it takes. Now, this was produced by Spicy Tales and was another Kickstarter-based visual novel. What really intrigued me by this one was it's created by the same person who does Spice and Wolf, which is one of my favorite manga, and light novels and anime. Basically, any format that it's in, I seem to enjoy. So I was curious about this one. Now, we are going to be doing the English version because my Japanese is absolute rubbish, so let's not even bother trying to figure that one out. And jump right in. Jump right in as I cough. In the past, people really believed that there was a doorway to an alternate world on the dark side of the moon. This dark side could not be seen from Earth, and it was only a few decades ago that images were successfully taken of it. As Earth had been visited, mapped, and divested of all its mysteries and secrets, it was made painfully clear that there were no rabbits on the moon, no traces of aliens, and certainly no pieces of portals to alternate worlds. This was perhaps why the journey to the dark side of the moon through the vastness of space was so fascinating for me when my parents took me there as a kid. Mankind had never set foot upon any of the glittering stars that were arrayed before me. When I realized that, I felt a desire to leave my footprints where no one had gone before. Star Trek! It wasn't until amazing footprints that sent shivers down my spine. And white screen. The end! Black screen. The beginning? With a click, my mobile PC turned on. I awoke to the whirring of the hard drive. Since I had fallen asleep curled up in my chair clutching my PC, it was difficult to get my body to move. My body felt so stiff, I was sure that a careless motion would break something. Even so, I rather enjoyed the sensation of slowly stretching out my limbs from this cramped position after waking up. It made me feel alive and truly let me know that I was awake. I willed my arms to move, then my legs. Although hardly efficient, this was how I chose to do things, and was what happened when I woke up every morning. It was a satisfying action, and one I never had a chance to savor before I left home. On top of the table, I had left my rather crude diode lamp on, and a coarse layer of fat had formed on the surface of the leftover coffee in my dirty cup. Wait, hold on. Why is there fat in your coffee? What do you consider coffee, or what are you putting in your coffee that's a thing? That's not healthy or sanitary. Beside my cup was a half-eaten chocolate bar, which I reached for and crammed into my mouth. I swallowed the unpleasantly sweet chunk as the PC finished booting up. At that moment, my brain went to work as I verified that I had my wallet, memory cards, and bag on me, and that none of it had been stolen while I was asleep. Where are we falling asleep that's an issue? It appeared that I had survived the previous night. Why is that a concern? Only then did I breathe a sigh of relief. However, in order for me to survive today, I would have to make some money. It had been 3 months and 12 days since I left home. Telling myself that I wasn't just some well-to-do kid pretending to be a ruffian, I flipped open the organic display. Okay, that is a very energetic beat for having just woken up.